I rise today to speak about the recent terrorist attacks around the world, including, of course, the horror of Paris, but also to talk about what undergirds that, and that's the threat posed by ISIS. Some use the acronym ISIL, or Daesh is another phrase that's been used to describe this vicious terrorist group. But I think we need to, at the same time as we're trying to prevent terrorist attacks, focus on the broader policy to destroy ISIS. We know that it's been 4.5 years since the people of Syria began protesting against the repressive regime of Bashar al-Assad. And as we also know, that conflict, as it escalated rapidly and was coupled with a dysfunctional and sectarian government in Iraq, especially starting from the capital of Baghdad, the fighting and unrest created space for extremism to grow and to take root. About 1.5 years ago, we saw the emergence of the group we now know as ISIS. This group poses a very serious threat to our national security as well as to the security of many parts of the world. And there's no question that ISIS is a clear threat to the security of our partners in the region, and as we know, most horrifically in the last few days in Europe. They also have a desire to attack the U.S. homeland. We know that. We've got to remember that this is a group that originated as an al-Qaeda offshoot. They share the same motivations, or at least similar motivations, and they, of course, share the same brutality, if not worse. In recent weeks, ISIS has claimed responsibility for horrific attacks outside of Syria and Iraq. They claim responsibility for bombing of a Russian airliner that went down over Egypt and the Sinai, killing all of its passengers, Russian passengers. ISIS suicide bombers attacked a market in Beirut, Lebanon, just last week, just before Paris. And then, of course, came Friday night, the 13th. This was, as has been reported, a coordinated, ruthless, and despicable attack in Paris that killed 129 innocent civilians. So what this horror, and we could list other examples, but these most recent events remind us, what this horror reminds us is what our job is here in the United States Congress and across our country, but especially when it comes to the role of the United States federal government. We have at least two responsibilities in this area. Number one is to prevent terrorists from coming into the United States of America. And second, but related, is to destroy ISIS, without a doubt. To do both of these will continue to be difficult and challenging. And anyone who can come up with a simple proposal or a commentary that makes it seem simple really doesn't know what they're talking about, really doesn't understand the complexity of this, and I even doubt their commitment to it when they speak about one-line answers to difficult, challenging problems. Last year, I was blessed in 2014, June of 2014, to have the chance to go to Normandy. Senator Leahy, the senior senator from Vermont, organized a visit to Normandy on the 70th anniversary of D-Day. And for someone representing any state, in my case representing the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, where so many Pennsylvanians, and of course so many Americans, died on the beaches of Normandy, or died within days of that battle. It was deeply moving to be in Normandy, to listen to presentations from those who had lived through the horror of Normandy and those who were coming back to celebrate the fact that they had served and they were alive after those 70 years. We were able to see the beaches. We saw the cemetery, where I walked onto the cemetery, and the first grave that I happened to look at was one of a Pennsylvania soldier, just fortuitously, when I was looking at the first marker, the first grave. And one of the themes of that visit, of course, was France, the people of France, thanking the United States, thanking allies, and expressing gratitude in so many different ways, and in heartfelt ways, at the leadership level, from President Hollande all the way down. And one of the best images was this image here. I'll put it up on the easel. This is an enlarged version of what was on a brochure. And you can see it it's written in 2 languages, of course, and the translation is 70th anniversary of the liberation of France, in English and French. And the date, the 6th of June, 2014, commemorating the 70th anniversary. What you may not be able to make out from a distance is the image. It's, of course, a beach, and it's the image of a little girl. She's got an orange plastic pail and a green plastic shovel, an image we all understand. A child going onto the beach to play in the sand, and she's in a yellow dress with her back towards us. She's moving towards the beach. What's so moving about this expression of gratitude by the people of France is that the shadow that emanates from that little girl is not her shadow. It's the shadow of an American GI, or what I believe to be an American GI, but I'm not sure anyone could contest it. A profound and very moving and powerful expression of gratitude that all of us can understand. That this little girl would not be able to be on that beach, to play in freedom on that beach or in any other place, in the places that were under attack during World War II, were it not for the bravery of American soldiers, the commitment of the American people, the work that was done to undergird that effort by the Allies against the Axis powers. But a very powerful reminder of the contribution of that soldier, depicted by the shadow, and the freedom that little girl can enjoy because of that sacrifice. Profound sacrifice. Sacrifice you can't even describe if you had volumes of books to write about it. And I was moved because it was a wonderful expression of gratitude to the people of the United States by the French people. And I was thinking about that in the aftermath of this horror. Folks all over the United States and across the world were expressing solidarity with the people of Paris and the people of France. And it gave us a chance to try to give back to them in the aftermath of not just a tragedy, but a year or so after they expressed gratitude to us. So this relationship between our 2 countries is very strong, and it goes back to the beginnings of our republic and even back to the days of the Revolution. But that image of that little girl probably couldn't be expressed or presented were it not for what happened in World War II, what happened on the beaches of Normandy. And again, that result that we were able to achieve, working with allies the world over, would not be possible were it not for the work of people around the country sacrificing, the soldiers and their families, the factories, the spouses who worked in factories while the soldiers were overseas. And there was a lot of good work done then by the United States Congress to support the war effort. So we have to figure out a way here to get back to that kind of sacrifice, that kind of commitment. There was a reminder recently of what a member of this body said around that time, in about 1945. Senator Arthur Vandenberg from the state of Michigan. He delivered a speech in January of 1945, a seminal speech on this floor. Senator Vandenberg was a Republican, an avowed isolationist, and a staunch opponent of President Roosevelt. But on that day, he said, and I quote, "We cannot drift to victory. We must have maximum united efforts on all fronts, and we must deserve the continued united effort of our own people." It is Vandenberg's example of setting aside partisan politics for the good of our nation that gives us the expression, quote, politics stops at the water's edge. We've all heard that expression. And if we haven't, we should educate ourselves. And if we've heard it, we should remind ourselves of it. But I'm afraid when we debate foreign policy, security policy here, there's often a dismissal of that basic lesson that he taught us. I'm afraid we've lost sight of his legacy, that politics must stop at the water's edge when it comes to our security, whether that's the fight against terrorism itself or whether that's a military campaign against ISIS. This fight against ISIS demands our attention, but it also demands our unity. Unity is not just a nice expression, something we should hope for. The challenge demands it. If we're not unified, it's going to be very difficult to defeat ISIS or any other threat, frankly. We must not do oversight by soundbite when it comes to this policy. We can engage in simply, as some have done, not everyone, but enough to be concerned in both houses of Congress, categorical condemnation of the president's policy on virtually everything in the international arena. That doesn't move the ball down the field. It also doesn't absolve the president of accepting and incorporating critiques of the policy, specific critiques of what we should be doing or are not doing or might want to consider. But categorical condemnation doesn't help anyone. It doesn't solve the problem. It just divides people and prevents us from having that essential unity to make sure that the strategy works. So if I or anyone else, and I've been critical of a number of the president's policies on the international stage, I haven't always agreed with them, but if you're going to disagree with the president or disagree with a colleague about something as important as a strategy to defeat maybe what most people believe is the biggest threat to the civilized world, you should be very specific. That unity demands that you're specific. We don't have time for just words and finger pointing. We need a bipartisan approach to this challenge. So we do need bipartisanship, we need sober and serious deliberation, and we also need spirited debate. I'm not advocating that someone doesn't criticize the policy or engage in a very heated exchange with someone who has a different point of view. But it's got to be a debate, and it's got to be an engagement that yields a result. And the result is a policy and a strategy that's going to be effective and that has some degree of substantial unity. A lot of our allies look at the squabbles here in Washington and wonder how serious we are about this fight. If all we do is just comment and answer reporters' questions and maybe go to a hearing once in a while, that's okay, but this policy is going to take a lot more than that. Some of our allies look at our failure to unite behind a common strategy and wonder whether the United States will be an enduring partner for as long as it takes to eliminate ISIS from the planet. Not just to defeat them on the battlefield, but to destroy them. And a lot of these allies, I'm afraid, are wishing for more Senator Vandenbergs, or at least more Vandenberg-Roosevelt days where you could disagree almost violently about domestic policy or even an aspect of our security. But at some point you come together and say, we're going to move forward with this strategy and work together. In November of last year, the president outlined a multi-part strategy to address the threat posed by ISIS. He spoke about the airstrike campaign in Iraq and Syria, which now involves 11 countries and has yielded more than 8,000 airstrikes as of last week. Those strikes have taken out ISIS leaders, It's taken out financiers and bomb makers and foreign fighters and foreign fighter recruiters. And of course, most recently, just last week, just before the news, horrific news about Paris, we were told that the man responsible for the beheadings of ISIS hostages had in fact been killed. That was a good result for the civilized world. And we also heard from the president at that time and since that time about a 60-plus nation coalition. Most recently, there have been hits on the tanker trucks bringing oil out of ISIS-held areas for the sale on the black market, hits on communications equipment or weapons caches, and they've helped protect opposition fighters and cleared the way for significant territorial gains, especially by the Kurdish Peshmerga forces, great fighters in this battle. Reports now indicate that ISIS territorial holdings in Iraq and Syria have been diminished by as much as 25% in roughly the last year. CENTCOM's assessment, this isn't an assessment by a politician, this is CENTCOM. CENTCOM, their assessment indicates that the Baji refinery in the city of Tikrit has been largely retaken, as has the city of Sinjar, in a main road connecting ISIS strongholds in Raqqa and Mosul. These airstrikes are denying ISIS safe haven and significantly hindering their ability to move freely around areas where they operate. So, what have we heard over and over again? Airstrikes alone will not win this. I agree with that. I get that. But airstrikes are moving the ball down the field in the sense that they're giving the opportunity to fighters on the ground and helping other aspects of the strategy. So we've got to continue the airstrikes. I hope people around here don't start saying, well, airstrikes alone don't do the job, so let's stop the airstrikes. No, we got to continue them, and if necessary, for years, many years. But this strategy is not just a military strategy. The president also outlined an effort to counter the financial networks that support ISIS, which gets funding from multiple sources. We know them: illicit oil sales, trafficking in antiquities and other goods, extortion of the local communities, and outside donations. The Department of Defense is targeting financiers for kinetic strikes. It's a fancy way of saying they're going to be taken out if you're a financier. While Treasury has sanctioned a number of senior ISIS leaders and facilitators, cutting off any access to the United States financial system. The strategy also includes measures to address foreign fighter recruitment and travel. We're also working to expose ISIS, their hypocritical propaganda, which, as many Muslim leaders around the world have said, is inconsistent with their religious values. It's clear that there can be no enduring defeat of ISIS without remedies for the governance issues that created this space for extremism to fester. In Iraq, we're working to create an inclusive government that has the capability to counter ISIS. In Syria, we need a negotiated political solution that ensures Bashar al-Assad, whose continued presence in Damascus has been a recruiting windfall for ISIS, has no role in the future of Syria. He's got to go. And I've said that many, many times. But I do appreciate the fact that Secretary Kerry and his team have recognized these underlying problems and have worked to address them. So while the administration has taken important steps, we know for sure that it's not enough. We know that. Recent events require an intensification of our efforts. I've critiqued this Syria policy for years, and will continue to press the administration to do more on ISIS financing. We've got to make sure that ISIS can't pay their people, so they can't pay salaries. We got to cut off their financing so they can't operate, so they can't pay for propaganda, so they can't buy weapons, so they can't buy ammunition, and so they can't make the horrific IEDs that kill innocent civilians and kill soldiers. So we must continue this debate as members of the Senate with the administration. Part of that, part of making sure that we get the financing challenge in the right place is to confirm Mr. Adam Zubin, who would play a substantial determinative role in the Treasury Department. So what do we do about all this? Well, it's been very difficult around here to get people focused on a bipartisan strategy. And there's a lot more we can do. But I believe the establishment of a bipartisan study group comprised of experts and former government officials from both sides of the aisle will be useful at this juncture. This group should be authorized by Congress, appropriated a modest amount of money to supporting its work, similar to the Iraq study group that was formed in 2006. The group should evaluate the nature of the ISIS threat, as well as the conditions in Iraq and Syria that have allowed it to grow and evolve, and it should evaluate the military and non-military options available in the United States to address this threat and the underlying conflicts and governance issues. There's a lot this group could do and contribute to what would be a stronger bipartisan, unified policy. There are many outside experts whose careers of service in the Middle East in civilian, military, and intelligence roles offer a wealth of expertise. This group could conduct its work over a 6 to 9 month period and report back to Congress with its findings. And if they could do it faster than that, we'd certainly authorize them to do that and encourage that. Initiating this bipartisan study doesn't mean we should press pause on our current efforts. Members of Congress need to continue to bring the fight, or the members of Congress need to continue to support our soldiers bringing the fight to ISIS with intensity and focus. We need to continue our efforts to reach a negotiated political transition in Syria and to encourage inclusivity and good governance in Iraq. They've got to get their act together and make sure that if a Sunni soldier doesn't feel part of his own government, they've got to make sure that they're supporting a unified government. We need to continue to press the growing humanitarian crisis that's emanating from Iraq and Syria. But I believe our efforts to defeat ISIS and our long-term goal of countering violent extremism would benefit from a serious, bipartisan, expert review that this study group could work on and present. So, Mr. President, in closing, I want to once again invoke the words of Senator Vandenberg. In that same speech that he gave in the 1940s, he said, quote, "Here in the Senate, we do not have perpetual agreement between both sides of the aisle, but we've never failed to have basic unity when crisis calls," unquote. We've never failed to have basic unity when crisis calls. Crisis has called right now. We know that. The crisis is ISIS and terrorism. We have to destroy ISIS and prevent terrorism from coming to our shores. We don't have time for politics. We don't have time for people talking in sound bites and pretending they're doing oversight. We need bipartisan work that will bring people together on a unified strategy. I'd urge my colleagues to reflect on the spirit of Vandenberg's seminal speech and to find a unified path forward that supports our longstanding partners and protects the security of this great nation. And let me conclude with this picture. This is a picture of a little girl who can walk on a beach in freedom because of the bravery and the sacrifice by our soldiers in World War II. If we are worthy of that sacrifice, we better get our act together here and come together, both parties, and make sure that we have a bipartisan policy. We don't have time for finger pointing. We have to come together and make sure that we do all we can to have a sound, serious, bipartisan effort against ISIS and against terrorists. And that, I believe, is a mission worthy of a great nation and certainly worthy of the sacrifice of the people who are on the battlefield right now. Our soldiers, our fighters, as well as soldiers from around the world, and certainly worthy of the sacrifice that led to the beautiful expression of gratitude that the French people gave us just last year. Mr. President, I yield the floor.